Alex, I'm going to give you some power here. Um,
Power, I love power.
yeah, I know you do. You're greedy for power. Where are you? Here we go. So watch the Zoom. I mean the my co-host. Okay. So if you hear anybody beeping in, if you can kind of watch that, and if you can watch the chat too,
Right. Let
and
them
Lynn, feel
inside.
free to do that too. Lynn's going to be a short timer here, though. Anyway, let's get rolling along. It's 9:35. My name's John Mudd. I'm the chair of this meeting, this Midtown South Community Council, and it's good to have everyone here. Hi, everybody. I see people waving. Terrific. Let me just pop up the agenda, give you a brief look at what we're going to be talking about. We have a very packed meeting. I'd love to go around and have people introduce themselves, but I think that would take a little bit too much time. So if you would, right beside your name, if you put your affiliate in so everybody knows who you are, and feel free to chime in with a hand, raised hand, or if you see a moment of breath, I don't mind you popping in if it's pertinent. Anyway, we have some terrific guests today. We have Keith McHenry, founder of Food Not Bombs, will be speaking, and Jack Lester and Paul Graziano is here about the city of Yes, and Ray Rogers might pop in, speak a little bit about stock transfer rebate, and we're gathering together, starting to talk about what real housing might look like. Damu has she did a presentation last month. I think maybe many of you had were present. So we're going to expand on that. We're going to be meeting and discussing and see if we can do uh, some development and bring it back here for you folks. And by the way, uh, I need folks on the board. So if you want to get involved, in the health, housing, food, we're doing our farm is we're starting the plan for this year's farming. We have a plot upstate that we bring food down. We also get some overflows from a farmer, and we're hoping to develop a tabling event here, a regular tabling event to sell food and take the overflows from the farmers and spread it around to folks who need it, folks who are elderly or the folks who are in the shelters. Um, and we have our small urban farm here in the city. So we need folks that anybody who has a green thumb, feel free to come forward. We work on health issues and we work on housing and development issues. Those are close to our heart because development are the core problems of many things, of our stability. Um, let's see, our policy, we haven't been meeting for policy because we don't have one that we're focused on or enough folks that want to come and work on those issues. Um, the annual report, if you saw the agenda, you can see what events we're planning. We need some funding. We have some interesting plans for the year. If you haven't caught it, Keziah Glow's WBAI segment, Renee Kitt and myself was on it. That was prior to the rally down at City Hall and prior to the hearing. And and I believe I have the link to the hearing. It was a terrific hearing.
Hmm.
Uh, Mr. Banks, Councilman Banks, his first name eludes me at the moment. Len, you remember who he is? Anyway, he was terrific. I don't feel like we
Not
have that.
Steve Banks.
I'm sorry?
Is it Steve?
No, it's
No.
not Steve.
Okay.
Sometimes I don't feel like we have enough friends in public office, but with this fellow, he did some real digging as far as the housing, the related, the folks that want to demolish Elliott, Chelsea, and Fulton House, and he really did some digging, did some pressing. He was very impressive, and and a lot of people spoke up there, and it was a terrific hearing. Um, let's see, special introductions. Alex, any news? Well, you've got a presentation you're doing. We're going to get to that. Rob, do you have anything that you want to speak to real quick, or anything you want to say?
Just that there will, April 16th, there will be a film called Beyond the Bridge, which two filmmakers travel around the country looking at homelessness and how it's handled in different municipalities. Most of those municipalities use a model called Housing First, where they provide housing first and bring any wraparound services. It'll be April 16th at the School of Visual Arts. More information will follow.
Oh, thanks, Rob. Lily, I think you wanted to say something really quick, right?
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Lily from NY Connect Center Independence for the Disabled of New York, and we are a program that we assist people with all disabilities of all ages, assist with housing applications, Medicaid, SNAP, and benefits. Regarding housing, we assist with the application, but we don't approve nor deny. But we are always glad to help people with any assistance that they need. Also, we assist with the 2010E applications. Those applications, we have to start them from the beginning. And any questions, I'll put my information on the chat. Thank you.
Thanks, Lily. Anyone new that wanted to speak up, want to introduce themselves? We always like to meet some new people. Leonard, go ahead. Do you have something? Go ahead.
Yeah, just
You're frozen there, Leonard.
I happen to be a retiree of District Council 37. I just want to announce that on Thursday at noon, there's going to be a demonstration. I don't know if people have heard, but there have been 55 layoffs at the Brooklyn Museum. I don't know if these are connected to the cuts in the federal budget, but they were announced suddenly, and there's a rally being sponsored at noon to 1 on Thursday at the Brooklyn Museum. So hopefully there'll be a lot of people there opposing these layoffs.
Thanks, Leonard. Anybody else? Jane, you're a new name. I see you. By the way, put your affiliates in next to your name if you would. Jane, anything you want to add or say hello?
Hi, I work for the Supportive Housing Department at BronxWorks.
Oh,
It's my
nice
first time here, so thanks for having me.
Okay, good. Yeah, we used to work with BronxWorks pretty closely a few years ago, and we went upstate, saw the respite beds, and we were working on policy. Maybe we want to get back on that, about people being in shelters, there's some basic needs. So it's good to have you, Jane. Anybody else?
I wanted to say my dad and sister are on the call.
Oh, nice, very nice. You want to point them out, or you want to keep them incognito?
Roland and Dominga. Roland's my dad. Dominga's
Okay.
my sister.
Hi, Roland. Hi, Dominga. Nice to have you here. Okay, so let's get back to the agenda. We have let's see, our New York State Budget 101 March means it's budget season again. Basic information on the process and overview on expectations. Alex, you want to introduce legislative activists and tenant activists, Alex. And I'm always appreciative to have him on here. Alex, go ahead.
Thank you, John. I need to get to the screen that shows my slideshow. 1 second. Can you tell me what you're seeing on your screen right now?
I see the
Kathy Hochul?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, let me start with where we are exactly on calendar. So good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining. I'm Alex Yong, a member of Midtown South Community Council. I help John in some areas, but mostly in the area of legislation. So this PowerPoint focuses on when the budget's phases begin and end, because what I've noticed is that many folks think the budget is a March, April thing, but it begins much earlier than that. But it's the slide you're seeing now that gets the most attention from the press and just overall the most attention. So I'll also explain when in the cycle it is when housing advocates can give their input. And so for that, let's go to the very beginning. Let me jump to slide 1. Okay. So it all starts with the executive budget, and where a lot of advocates get tripped up is with the wording, because executive doesn't mean final. It just means that it's coming from the executive branch of the New York State government, and in other words, Kathy Hochul. So this is due by January 31st of every year, and anybody can react to it. But there's like a system for that. So all of February, after that executive budget is made public, the legislature must react to the governor's budget. And that's done through the Senate one house and the Assembly one house. Both are due by the first few days of March. So like right now. And the text inside each of the 2 proposed budgets should reflect the will of the people, because it's from the legislature. So there's 213, 63 senators and 150 assembly members, and they are expected to attend the February hearings in addition to reacting themselves. So they have to react and then hear reactions. Let's see, next. So when the one houses are ready for sign off by, I would say, the end of this year, then Liz Kruger and Gary Pretlow will sign off on their respective one house. Liz Kruger is the chair of the Senate Finance Committee, and Gary Pretlow is the chair of the Assembly Ways and Means Committee. And so the two one houses are never precisely matchy-matchy, but a lot of line items do end up with similarities or even sometimes identical. So when they sign off, they hand the 2 documents over to the top ranked leaders of the legislature. So that's ASC, Andrea Stewart Cousins, and Carl Hastie. And then we get into the home stretch, which is what I opened with. So we should be approaching this really quickly at this point in the calendar. So it's really best to call this 3 leaders in a room, because as you can see, it's no longer 3 men in a room, and that was the slang for the for this stage of the process in past years. So yeah, just call it 3 leaders in a room. The finalized state budget, also called the enacted budget, is due by April 1st. It's typically always late, but they've committed to not let that happen this year. We'll see if that happens or not. And hold on, why isn't this thing moving? So, I'm so sorry. Okay, so when can housing advocates enter the picture? When can they insert their voice? At which phase? So that is in February. That's the short answer, during the one house hearings. So the February hearings are for public input, and testimony is often by invitation only. So, I wouldn't get too anxious about where it says invitation only, because every hearing listing has a contact person. And if your request to give testimony is approved, then you're quote unquote invited. So invitation only is not some elitist thing where only cronies are invited. That would be bad governance. But if you do get a no from the office, that probably just means the hearing lineup is too full. And there are 2 links that if you're an advocate, you would need to have bookmarked. The first link shows great contact info. And when you use the second link, it shows a lot of useful deadlines. And you can see those here. The second link, it gives the deadlines of when to request to testify and when to give written or oral testimony. If you're giving oral testimony, you also have to give written testimony. And then the first link is more simplified. It gives more logistical information like the room, start time, end time, and the contact person, clear as day. So why does any of this matter? So it matters because anything can be included in the Senate One House or the Assembly One House or Alpha, which I'll get to in a second, or the final budget. And surprisingly, a matter doesn't even need funding. So let me see here. 1 second. So Title VII policy proposals don't need to be attached to a funding ask. However, if there is a funding ask, then certain line items must align with the appropriations section of every proposal, and most of all within the enacted budget, or what most regular folks know as the final budget, because naturally, if it's not in the enacted budget, then whatever you were hoping would be funded wasn't funded. And now to close out on a fun note, it's about why some housing advocates call the executive budget alpha, which is just faster to say, but I don't think they really should say that, because alpha is just one section of the executive budget. You can see the other Title VII categories at the yellow link, but alpha is an acronym for Education, Labor, and Family Assistance. If you want to see this cycle's alpha, you can go to the long link in blue. And remember, it's not Alphaba, the Green Witch and Wicked, it's the Alpha Bill, a part of the Title VII policy proposal. And that concludes this presentation. If there are questions, I ask that you contact me or John offline so that other presenters this morning can go. But there's our contact information in the lower left. Thank you.
Cool, Alex, thanks. So basically, we should be presenting this and talking about this during our holidays, like Christmas, December, and Thanksgiving. And
that would be good. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I think okay, that gives us a time frame to start really thinking about this, because this is really for us to have input or effect. It's already past that.
John and Alex, if I could just comment very quickly.
Sure. Go right ahead.
So one of the things that's happened in recent years, you know, and again, I'm kind of circling back to why we're here today, but if you'll remember, when the governor in 2022 and 2023 created the housing compact, right? That was her city of yes, kind of thing. What she did was she did what we call legislate by omnibus budget bill. So what Hochul has done over the last few years, she didn't do it in 2024 because she got smacked down, basically. But what she did was she stuffed the budget bill with legislation. So what she did was she said, okay, you know, every part of every area around a train station is going to have, you know, kind of the transit-oriented development stuff, for example, that got approved under City of Yes. She tried to do that across the entire state. So what I just want to throw out there is, oftentimes, and this doesn't just have to do with City of Yes, but this is for everything. Oftentimes, it's really important that the date that you really need to be following is the date of the State of the State address. The State of the State address is the date that the governor releases their report, whoever the governor is. And in that report, there are things that are highlighted that say, this is going to be a priority. And oftentimes this goes directly into the omnibus budget. At that point, the governor has 30 days to remove any item that they put into that budget bill. Otherwise, the legislature has to try to remove it. And then you get into that negotiation of the three people in a room thing. So what happened with the first year in 2022, when she first started the housing thing, the legislature basically came bearing down on her. You remember she was running for her to get into her first term because she came in under a special situation. So what happened was, on the 30th day at 7 p.m., she stripped out all the housing provisions because the legislature went nuts and said, what are you doing? You can't do this. In 2023, feeling that she had strength behind her because she won the election, she did it again. And this time she did not strip out those provisions. And that's why, if you'll remember, the budget was something like 5 weeks late because the legislature refused to sign off on what she put in the budget. It was two things. It was bail reform and it was her housing compact. And that's what held up the budget for so many weeks. So at the end of the day, she ultimately stripped it because frankly, what she was doing was unconstitutional. That's a whole nother discussion. But I just want to throw it out there that it's not just about having the conversation before, during the holidays. It's the second that state budget becomes public, her report, you have to pour through it, especially look through the housing section since you're very focused on that, but on whatever issue you have and see what's going to be stuffed into that omnibus budget bill, because then you have a very short period of time to try to either get them to remove it from the bill willingly or have the legislature give a heads up and have them remove it for you in that fight. So that's all I wanted to say.
It's amazing. That's a nice follow-up. And that would take quite a bit of planning. Do you often look through that yourself?
Every year. Now I do. I never used to.
Yeah.
But because Cuomo did this, but it would be a pet project. It would be like, I want to do, tear down Madison Square Garden, or it'll be a single thing. With her, she tried to do broad policy in the budget bill. And again, it's unconstitutional for the state to try to create local zoning. It is utterly unconstitutional. And that's what she tried to do. And ultimately, both Hasty and Cousins, but particularly Hasty, said, I'm not going to violate the state constitution by doing this. You are setting this up for a massive legal showdown, and I'm not going to get involved in that. And that's why she ultimately backed down in 2023. In 2022, she did it because the people who spoke in her ear said, if you do this and you don't back down, you're going to endanger your run for governor.
I want to thank Paul for the reminder of 2022 because I remember 2023 pretty clearly with the housing compact, but I wasn't really aware that it had begun in 2022.
It did. And that's when I created the Save One Family. It was because of that, because we went, oh my God, what is she doing? And again, it kind of died quicker because she backed down, but in 2023, she didn't. She felt like she had the power to do it. And ultimately she did back down. But anyway, I just wanted to throw it out there that the timing of this is the second that state budget report comes out, you have to start pouring through it and see what she or he, whoever's going to be in office, is stuffing into that omnibus budget bill.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. That's a wonderful cap to that presentation of Alex. That's great. Chimed in just perfectly. And since you're speaking, and Keith isn't here, I was planning on having you on a later part because I wanted to roll with you till the end. But
it'd be better for us to go earlier because I think Jack and we're actually preparing for another meeting later on this afternoon. So if we can.
Okay, absolutely. So let's get to your agenda. Let me pin you here, and I'll pin Jack here with you. Why don't you introduce yourselves and take it away?
Sure.
May I start?
I was just going to say, I'm Paul Graziano.
Right.
I've been here before. As you know, I'm an urban planner, land use and zoning expert, and I've been, rallying the troops against the city of Yes, obviously. And today, I'm introducing you to our attorney, Jack Lester, and his co-counsel, Lawrence Marks, who you might also want to pin on there too, John. And they're going to start the conversation, and then I'll jump in. So if that's okay.
Thank you, Paul. It's wonderful to meet everyone. I'm very impressed by your public policy agenda, the objectives you have as an organization. Myself, I've been working as a community attorney now for almost 4 decades. So this city of Yes presents quite a challenge. It does promote real estate development, speculation, but not affordable housing. And I think that's what we're going to emphasize in our presentation today. I would like to also introduce co-counsel Lawrence Marks, who is a retired Supreme Court judge, He's also former chief administrative judge of the entire judicial system in the state of New York. And he's joining our legal team so that we can have an effective challenge to what we think is a very abusive zoning change that upsets almost 6 decades of preservation of open air, light, space, affordable housing, and health and safety regulations. So I'd just like Larry to introduce himself so the group can have a sense of our legal team.
Yeah, as Jack said, I was a judge in sitting in Supreme Court, which many of you may know is the primary trial court in New York. It's called the Supreme Court. And I did that for 15 years. I sat primarily in Manhattan Supreme Court. And as Jack said, in addition to sitting on the bench and hearing cases in Supreme Court, I was very involved for many years in the management of the court system, culminating in the last 7+ years until I retired 2 years ago as chief administrative judge responsible for the day-to-day operation of the statewide court system. And I've retired from the court system 2 years ago. I've been practicing law somewhat part-time, although given some of the difficult cases I've worked on, it's not always part-time. And I've known Jack Lester for, I don't know, something like 45 years, and we've worked together in the past. And we've been working together on some cases, some very interesting, important cases, including this one. So happy to meet all of you, and hopefully we can work together on this important case.
Thank you. I'd like to turn the meeting over to Dana, who's Dana Amarillo, who works in my office. And we prepared I guess, kind of a summary or a primer as to our legal challenge to City of Yes. And I do want to emphasize, because I know it's in the spirit of what your group is intending as your public policy objectives, to emphasize that City of Yes is essentially a land grab for large real estate developers to eviscerate almost 50 years of environmental and zoning protections for the quality of life for City of New Yorkers. They have disguised this zoning proposal as a pitch for more housing. But while it does, they say, encourage more housing, it's essentially encouraging market rate or speculative housing at the expense of affordable housing. So we have prepared, and I know Paul has been working on this for 18 months. Larry and I have joined this legal fight over the last 5 weeks, but we've been astounded at the remarkable violations of environmental law that has occurred in the promulgation of City of Yes. And I'd like to say I'm happy to take questions as I go along, because I know this is a very complicated process that is the most comprehensive rezoning of the City of New York since 1961. I'm not sure how much involvement your group has had through the review process, but certainly willing to take questions from a legal perspective. And Paul is here to add his expertise on all the factual analysis he's done. So I'll go through the outline. And as I say, as people have questions, I'm happy to answer. So the first issue we should be aware of, and let's scroll back down a little bit to the top, is that this is the first citywide rezoning since 1961.
Jack,
Yes.
is there some slides supposed to be up here?
Yeah, we're sharing a screen. I don't know if you can see.
We're not seeing it.
Oh,
Oh,
so
you don't see
Dana,
it?
Oh, I see the screen. It's just it's a Word document.
Yeah, I see it also.
can
Oh,
everyone
then-
see it?
I
Yep.
can see, I can see it.
Hold
Well,
on,
it
I'm
was
gonna
up there
stop
for a second.
and start again. Hold on 1 second.
Yeah.
Is that better?
Yes, we see it now.
Okay.
My whole presentation is premised on everyone seeing it. So if people can't see it, that's an issue. But the overriding macro issue here is this is the first citywide rezoning since 1961. As you may know, New York City was the first city in the nation, the first jurisdiction in the nation to have zoning regulations, which would regulate land use in terms of manufacturing, commercial, residential, to protect people's health, safety, and welfare. During the progressive movement of the early 1900s, New York City passed what was known as tenement laws to protect air and light and to improve the quality of life for people who are suffering from, oppressive overdevelopment. So in 1961, Mayor Wagner reformed the entire zoning of the city of New York to enhance quality of life development. That was essentially the 1961 rezoning. And the rezoning was opposed and resisted by a lot of real estate developers because it restricted development in low density residential communities, neighborhoods throughout the city. For example, St. Albans, Rosedale, Laurelton, Cambria Heights, areas of Staten Island, the Bronx. It tried to preserve kind of a homeowner kind of district within the entire city of New York. It also tried to promote affordable housing where it could in the more high density districts of New York. In 1975, the New York State and New York City passed a series of environmental rules and regulations, which required that when you rezoned any district, or particularly, this kind of massive rezoning, that the rezoning would have to adhere to regulations that protected the environment. So this is the first time that the city has engaged in a massive citywide rezoning that must adhere to environmental laws and regulations. And our contention in the basic theory of our case, the body of this lawsuit, is that the Adams administration and Dan Garodnick at City Planning was so intent on promoting speculative and profiteering real estate development that they disguised this as a program to increase housing and affordable housing, which it does not do. And they
Jack, just to let you know, it hasn't moved from the first screen, the Word document. So I don't know if you're using slides right now, if it's moving through it, or you're supposed to move it from, had moved it, it hasn't.
No, we haven't moved it yet.
Okay,
just
sorry.
kind
So
of,
John, it's a Word document, so I think he's just going to scroll through it.
Got it. Okay, gotcha.
Just giving an introduction, I think.
yeah, I'm just giving the overall kind of essence or theory
I
of our
apologize.
position. And I'm appreciative of what you've been saying about your organization's goals and what your sympathies and activism has been based upon to demonstrate that this City of Yes rezoning prioritizes market rate, speculative, profiteering housing over affordable housing. But in terms of the litigation, in terms of the legal issues we're raising, the issue here is the violation of the state and city environmental quality laws and regulations. Is that kind of clear at this point? So,
Absolutely.
okay. So now I want to dive into more of the kind of detail issues that we're dealing with. But I wanted to set the framework because, you know, we're dealing with a citywide coalition that has a lot of different objectives and a lot of different goals. And we want to demonstrate that City of Yes really eviscerates most of what the community activists are concerned about. Okay. So in the first instance, the City of Yes claims, and this is really crucial to our legal challenge, that the proposed action would not result in significant environmental impacts in all of the following areas. And this is a drastic departure from what's required under the State Environmental Quality Review Act. So the final environmental impact statement that was published by the City Planning Commission went so far as to say that even though this was a massive, comprehensive rezoning of the entire city, it would not result in adverse environmental impacts in all of the following areas: land use, zoning, public policy, socioeconomic conditions, waste and sewage infrastructure, public health, neighborhood character. And because the conclusion that the EIS reached was that there would be no significant environmental impacts, even though we can prove, and we will prove through our experts, that there will be significant negative impacts, because they came to that conclusion in their final environmental impact statement, which, by the way, is thousands of pages. And one of the points they'll raise in defense of their position is that their analysis covered thousands of pages. But the analysis covered thousands of pages of basically repetitious excuses as to why they did not perform mitigation in any of those areas. And the State Environmental Quality Review Act is very clear that if negative environmental consequences are determined from an EIS, you must perform proper mitigation and alternatives. Now, that would have been a wise decision, because they were rezoning the entire city of New York, to come up with proper mitigation, ways to alleviate the significant negative environmental consequences in all those areas. But they painted with a broad brush, and they came to the conclusion we don't have to do any mitigation because there is no significant negative environmental consequences in those areas. So let's go to, so that's the first issue we'll be raising before the court. The second point is that they did come up, even though they tried to soft pedal the significant environmental consequences and say that there were no consequences, they did have to admit that there were significant environmental impacts on community facilities, which means early childhood programs, public education, elementary school education because of the increased density, that there would be significant impacts on open space, transportation, transit, traffic, pedestrian, historical and cultural resources, shadows, urban design, and visual resource, natural resource, hazardous materials. So they did come up with a fair conclusion on this point, that because of the increased density that would be established by City of Yes, that there would be significant negative environmental consequences. But then they did an about face. They did a 360 and said, even though there will be significant adverse environmental consequences, we don't have to evaluate this. We don't have to do mitigation. Why? Because they perform what's known as a generic EIS. What a generic EIS means is that because this is rezoning that will affect the next 3, 4, 5 decades, they cannot predict what the impacts will be on individual sites. And therefore, because they don't know what development will occur as a result of this rezoning, that they do not have to perform mitigation or come up with alternatives. And then we get to the third point, which that in the scoping document, and this is where Paul has put in a tremendous amount of work, and he'll address that, is they avoided having to do mitigation, and they avoided alternatives because they said we can do an environmental impact statement based on 28 prototypical sites across the city. Even though, and Paul will go into more detail, there are over 300 potential sites for development, but they selected 28 sites. And based on those 28 sites, they did their environmental review. And this methodology failed to take a hard look at, and the law requires a hard look at all significant environmental consequences. Plus, and this is the other issue we'll raise in the lawsuit, is they built on 2 prior stages, carbon neutrality and economic development. So housing opportunity was the 3rd stage of the city of Yes. The first 2 stages had no environmental review at all, carbon neutrality and economic development. So by piggybacking on the first 2 stages, they avoided the cumulative impacts of all 3 stages, leaving the future to as-of-right development, which will be exempt from any environmental review. So now we get to the 4th point.
Jack.
And again, this is
Jack,
a thumbnail sketch.
Jack,
And
sorry, can I just jump in for a second? You mentioned, just scroll back a little bit, go back to number 3 for a second. Sorry to interrupt. Number 3, you mentioned 28 prototypical sites in a city with over 300 unique sites. It wasn't 300, it's over 300,000.
I'm sorry. And that's why I left that chapter of the presentation.
Right. And so it's they're just for everybody to understand. They took 28 sites in the city, and there are 313,000 residential properties, not units, but properties in the city. So they took 9/1000ths of 1% sample, which is outrageous. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Yeah, 300K. Thank you.
That's why we have a team, Paul.
Right.
I do the legal analysis. You fill in the factual analysis.
Yep.
But Paul is absolutely correct. It would have been illegal if there were 300 sites, but 313,000 sites shows the irrationality of what the city did. Now, here's a key point that I hope people can understand. In the future, because of City of Yes, a lot of development will be as of right. What does as of right mean? As of right means that future development is devoid of any kind of environmental review or analysis. So they kind of created a Trojan horse, in a sense, that they put this program forward and will unleash a series of horrors in the future, because all of these zoning changes, and Paul can tell you there are hundreds, maybe thousands, but there are thousands, hundreds or thousands of rules and regulations that have been altered that would allow future development as of right. Every time you do a development as of right, it's shielded from environmental review. So they've created truly a horror story for the future by segmenting their prior environmental review. And we've assembled a good team of experts who have been involved in zoning in New York City for decades, who can tell you that this is unprecedented. The degree of density, overcrowding, environmental damage that will be unleashed under the pretext of creating more housing is truly devastating. But what they're not even saying, and there's thousands of pages of material which I've been going through. They're not even saying that this will promote affordable housing, which is something we promote, agree with, advocate for. What they're saying is this will promote more housing. But the experience has been that the more housing that's developed, the pressure on prices has gone up. As we know, that has promoted more luxury housing, more high-rise development. It's only accelerated the crisis for people who need affordable housing. That developers come in and they're not interested in public service. That's not their job. They're capitalists, and they're looking to promote profit. And this zoning, City of Yes, it's City of Yes for speculation. It's City of Yes for market-driven housing. So we'll have more luxury housing. The economic disparities between wealthy and poor New Yorkers will increase. This is an attack on the middle class. I grew up in Laurelton, Queens, a middle class homeowning community, low density. This is an attack on those communities in particular, but many others as well, because it will promote more density in those communities. So people who work their lives to save and to have home ownership, and this particularly impacts minority communities, St. Albans, Rosedale, Laurelton, Cambria Heights, Hollis, parts of the Bronx, Brooklyn. I'm most familiar with Queens, but these are civil servants, people who work for the city, people who strived all their lives for home ownership. Will now be under siege because these communities will be threatened with density obliteration. And we have an expert who will be talking about, as part of our presentation, the overtaxing of infrastructure, resources, sewer and water facilities. This is a giveaway to real estate speculation, which will unleash disasters for decades to come. And I want to congratulate Paul. He's organized and galvanized community boards and organizations throughout the city to fight this. And he's trying to raise the resources so that we can go up against the real estate industry and the city of New York and demonstrate to the court that this violates fundamental environmental principles.
Yeah, Jack, this is great. Yeah, I think it's really important. The latter part is particularly, that's what I've seen too, and throughout the hearings, and it was very clear. So do you guys want to see if there's any questions on this portion and then move on, or you want to continue? Should we break this down? It sounds like that's what you want to do.
Whatever is best for you, John.
Okay. Can we drop this screen, or is there more on this screen that
No,
you
then
want
you
to
can
show?
drop the screen. There we go.
That covers this screen.
Okay, Len, I know you have a tight timetable, Len. Did you want to ask any questions? Leonard might want maybe he's off to the bathroom or getting a cup of coffee. If there's no more questions, we'll proceed then. Okay.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Sorry if I'm late. I have trouble with my computers. Thank you, Jack. That's really a detailed report you're giving. It's kind of scary what's happening. So quickly, as of right buildings, how does a building get deemed as of right? And are there any legal recourses against anything that happens with that building, like demolition or anything like that? Thank you.
Do you want me to answer, or do you want to answer, Jack? Jack, you're muted. Hold on. Jack, there we go. There you go.
I unmuted. That was an excellent question. How a building is designated as of right is if it falls within the zoning regulation. It doesn't need any discretionary approvals. So, for example, because they're rezoning the entire city, let me give you an example. So if a building wanted to go a certain height previously, before the rezoning, and the height was violative of zoning restrictions, they would have to apply for a variance or a zoning change. But because they've increased the allowable height in the future, that building would not, or that developer would not have to go through any discretionary permits, would not have to apply it to city planning or the Board of Standards and Appeals, and would, as of right, develop that building simply by requesting a permit from the Department of Buildings. And the request for a permit is considered ministerial, and therefore it's exempt from any environmental review. And so this unleashes a whole series of developments which will be shielded from environmental review, where previously, if they had applied for increased height, bulk, or parking exemptions and so forth, they would have to go through a process that required an environmental review. So when they say city of yes, what they're saying is in the future, you developer will have an automatic yes. You won't have to go through any review. So it's city of yes for speculation and development.
So if the building is already an as of right building, I guess that's due to the before City of Yes was passed. If they were already deemed an as of right building, that means that they had already met the zoning requirements for that area, right? Am I getting that right?
No,
And
that's absolutely correct. So prior to the rezoning, if you had a right to do something, because it was within the zoning restrictions, regulations, and envelope, then you didn't have to go through any discretionary process. You just apply for a permit. It's as of right. There's no environmental review.
So do residents of those particular as of right buildings have any legal recourse in preventing anything from happening to their building, or they just don't have any legal recourse?
Well, in the past, if you wanted to apply for a permit that was as of right, you did not have recourse for a zoning issue. You may have had recourse for other issues if the owner or developer is violating the administrative code in some other ways, interfering with your health and safety in some other ways. But in terms of the zoning issues, you would not have recourse. So what this City of Yes does, it creates a whole enormous new category of zoning privileges that will not go through any kind of environmental review.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Luana, let me give you an example. So one of the big changes that was made in the lower density neighborhoods was the idea that, you know, that according to the city, well, we need to densify these areas. We need to build more housing in these areas. Now, most of these areas, you know, and let's say where I live in Eastern Queens, these are places that don't have infrastructure. They don't have transportation. They don't have the schools. They don't have any of the things that Jack was talking about in terms of, you know, the fact that they're refusing to say that they actually need this stuff in the EIS. So what they've done is they've said, well, one family zones only allowed one family homes. Two family zones only allowed 1 and 2 families homes. Well, now we're going to allow as of right on qualifying sites, and they created this whole framework that now if someone has this amount of property in this particular area where they could only build a 1 or 2 family home before, now they can build an apartment building. So before they would have had to go and get a rezoning, go through the whole ULURP process, go through, you know, the city, you know, the whole thing, community board, borough president, et cetera, et cetera. There's a whole process. They would have to fill out all the paperwork, and it's a lengthy review. Now, if you have a 5,000 square foot property in an area that's designated that you can do this, it's as of right. All they have to do is file the paperwork with the Department of Buildings, and they can tear down a 1 or 2 family home and build a 20-unit apartment building there, right? So that's what this does. And again, that's just a very simple explanation, but there's hundreds and hundreds of changes that they made in the 1,466 pages of zoning changes just for the housing piece. Altogether, for the 3 sections, because Jack was mentioning the first 2 parts of this, there wasn't even an environmental impact statement. It's over 5,000 pages of changes to the zoning text, which is, they basically rewrote the whole thing, which is terrible. So I hope that explains it a little better. But what it does is it takes away our rights as citizens to say, hey, you know what? This may be appropriate for this area, but it's not appropriate here. Now what they've done is said, well, we don't care. We're going to allow it to happen as of right.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think Renee had her hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, and I saw Renee. Renee?
Okay, so basically this would include NYCHA developments as well.
This
Yes.
includes every property in the city of New York.
Okay.
And for NYCHA, it's very interesting because the way they developed these projects was to give people some air, light, and space in these campus-like developments. I'm familiar with Stuyvesant Town, Peter Cooper, which is not a NYCHA project, but a similar campus type of project, which promoted open space, playgrounds, areas that had air and light. This promotes the development of buildings within those spaces. So you're taking away air, light, playgrounds, open space from these type of developments. And what's interesting is the EIS does not deny that. They acknowledge that. But they say we're not going to review it because it's speculative as to what will be developed in the future. So it's very disingenuous. As Paul likes to say, it's fraudulent. I don't know if I could use that word in court, but it certainly has the kind of coloration of fraud. Yes.
And I would just, again, add to that, which is the one change that was made between the time the City Planning Commission had their hearing and the time they voted was they removed one of the provisions, which is called campus infill provision, from NYCHA properties. However, all that is a bonus, right? So what that means is, again, if you're developing Stuyvesant Town, which is a private development, right, you get this campus infill bonus that allows you to build more. They didn't say that they're prohibiting infill in NYCHA. They're just not giving the campus infill bonus because they were coming up against federal regulations and they were trying to get around it. And I think that's the main reason that they dropped it, was because of NYCHA's very unique role, because it's not a privately owned development. So that's the only thing. It doesn't mean that it can't happen. It just means that that bonus won't occur for the campus infill, but they can still do the equivalent of campus infill without that bonus on NYCHA, which very clearly there are people who want to see that happen.
Okay, thank you. I was wondering about why they did that. It was actually the federal laws. Okay, thank you.
I think their legal people realized that it was going to be a headache for them. So they ultimately dropped it specifically only from the NYCHA complexes.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we can go ahead and move on to the next phase, if you like.
Sure. I mean, this is maybe my 4th time speaking with you guys, so you know me pretty well, and you've heard me with my fire and brimstone, and giving you a lot of information. I don't have too much to add except to say that to kind of circle back on some of the stuff. As you see, we're really getting into the legal argument now, right? Before I came here and kind of gave you guys the details, and I'm pretty sure that most of the people on this have heard me speak about this now at least once, if not twice, or perhaps 3 times. So the only thing I'll say is, the reason those zoning changes happened in 1961 when the zoning resolution, which by the way, the zoning resolution took over 20 years to create, right? It actually started during the Depression. It was held off by the war, by World War II, and it then took another 13 years to get to the point where it started coming into formation. So, it even took 2 years to adopt it. I mean, they started it in 1959 and it didn't get adopted till 1961. So this was something that took them decades to formulate. And that was because and this goes into what Jack said, New York City was the first major city that came up with a citywide set of municipal zoning ordinances. However, the original version of this, the build out for New York City under the previous regime, the 1916 zoning ordinance, was for 55 million people. And so what they realized in the 30s and 40s was that's crazy. We have 8 million people. Actually, in the 30s and 40s, we didn't even have 8 million people yet. But they knew that this number was crazy. So they redid it in 1961. And that was for a build out for 16 to 20 million people. So again, the previous zoning, and I've said this a number of times to you guys, the previous zoning, up until the City of Yes was adopted, allowed for 16 to 20 million people as of right. And now what they did was they turned the clock back to 1916. And one of my favorite little lines that I came up with was that Gorodnik and his legions kept saying, we need to get rid of outdated zoning. And what they wanted to do was get rid of outdated zoning and replace it with prehistoric zoning, right? They wanted to bring us back to 1960, basically to almost a 19th century mindset. And what we have been fighting against, and I think Jack really said it well, is these were put into place for a reason. These weren't put into place, part of the arguments was, oh, well, they wanted to allow for the spread of cars, and this was to create suburbanization, et cetera. No, this was to recognize that different parts of the city develop differently, right? The outlying areas obviously had much less development because of lack of infrastructure. The Second Avenue subway took 70 years. It was the first new subway line in 70 years, and it still isn't finished. I remember they started that in the 90s, right? So we're at 2025, and they've only built one leg of it to this point. So we know that those large-scale infrastructure projects, if they happen, it takes decades today versus what was happening in the early 20th century. And I think that's another piece of the puzzle here, is that the kind of broad brush strokes that could be done 100 years ago can't be done today because of stakeholders, because of reality. And what this has done is said, well, we're going to allow that explosion of development without increasing the infrastructure necessary. And here's how we're going to cheat in our environmental review to make it happen, right? So that's really what we're pushing back against. And again, we have a very small window to do that. We have to file this by April 17th. We were planning to try to file it in the next couple of weeks. Hopefully we can do that. But as you can tell, this is a Herculean effort. Now, really part of my pitch today was the last time I spoke to you guys, which I think was in January, I believe. I was here either December or January, was we were just starting to put the lawsuit together at that point. It was like literally just starting to happen. We are looking for plaintiffs, and we, of course, anybody who'd like to contribute financially to this would be great. We have raised a decent amount of money so far, which is good, which is why we have Jack and why we have other experts, et cetera, and Lawrence Marks as well. So, we are in a situation where we have the resources to move forward, at least to this stage. Obviously, any financial contribution is helpful. In terms of plaintiffs, and Jack can talk a little bit about this, one of the things that people are always worried about is, what's my exposure? Am I setting myself up for a lawsuit or financial ruin or whatever? There is no legal ability, and actually Jack said it very nicely last night at another meeting, they cannot come back and sue us for this, right? The city can't come back and sue you, and there is no financial obligation to being a plaintiff. So you're basically, to be a plaintiff in this case is for standing purposes, to show that, John Mudd, who lives at X, is being adversely affected by the city of Yes, and he lives here, and et cetera, et cetera. We have homeowners, we have property owners, we have tenants, we have all kinds of different classes, we have organizations, we have associations, we have elected officials, we have all sorts of different people who are plaintiffs in this. So, I just want to throw it out there that we certainly would be happy to have any of you as plaintiffs. I think I mentioned this to you the last time I was on, but now we're getting to the point where we need to nail down, the plaintiffs that we're going to have, and it's important for us to have geographic distribution across the city and of different types and styles, because part of our argument is, again, they're not looking at this with a fine-grained tooth, and we're making the argument that this is not only affecting my neighborhood in Queens, but this is going to affect your areas in Midtown South, and it's going to affect other parts of the city just in different ways, but every community is going to be affected by this.
So you're looking individuals as groups,
Yes.
I see.
Organizations, associations, individuals. Yeah.
Yeah. Alex, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks for that refresher, Paul. Specifically, I'm thinking of one organization who testified back in, I guess, July or whenever all of those hearings were going on. And they mentioned infrastructure and the lack of infrastructure considerations. Like, you're building all of this stuff and then you need extra, hospitals and other things like that. And so I wanted to know, at this juncture, are you allowed to say if that organization has joined in to your Article 78? Their name, City Club of New York.
No, the City Club has not joined in.
Oh, that's such a shame to hear. Okay.
No.
I was hoping they'd be on today. I was hoping they were going to be with us today.
No, the City Club has not joined on.
Perhaps we need to speak to them.
Yeah.
Listen, we can reach out to them. There are a lot of groups, that testified. Unfortunately, unlike the coalition that I've helped to put together, where we were all in it together, right? We understand that this is going to affect all of us. A number of organizations came forward as sort of as individual groups, like Greenwich Village, for example, right? Andrew Berman's group. Andrew Berman made a lot of noise about how bad the city of Yes is, but refused to join a larger coalition. Friends of the Upper East Side, same thing. Landmark West.
Did they give you a reason?
They're not, well, without disparaging anybody, I've known Andrew since high school. So it's hard to and again, I'm getting a little long in the tooth, but we've known each other for a long time. And it's certainly I used to be the president of the Historic Districts Council. So as someone who has dealt with preservation issues as well as zoning and land use, I've known him for a long time. He's their group and other groups, like I said, like Landmark West or Friends of the Upper East Side or Friends of Carnegie Hill. These groups all operate, and it's by the way, it seems to be more typical in Manhattan than it is in other parts of the city, but they tend to work as islands, right? You are a coalition, Midtown South. You're one of the few in Manhattan, right? You don't have large coalitions of organizations. You have individual organizations that make points. And what we've done in Queens and and now it's happening in Brooklyn, the Bronx, and Staten Island, is we have these umbrella organizations that have 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 organizations or more. And all of those groups have joined together. And I think I explained this to you before. That's why we have over 200 organizations working together now, which is unprecedented. So to me, it always seems counterintuitive that a group would stand up and say, this is wrong, we need to stop this, and then not work with other groups that feel the same way. I can't speak to what their motivations are, but I can say that it's not helpful in the grand scheme of things.
I had someone mention that they didn't quite agree with everything you stood for. And I said, well, we're looking at stopping them from the city of Yes. That's the goal.
Right.
I said, it doesn't
We're
really
all going to
matter.
disagree on the fine points. The basic issue is, again, what I've said to people is, this is going to be bad for everybody. And so everybody's got their own bone to pick with it. And, again, here's a great example. most of the community boards in the city voted against this.
Yeah.
Right? Only 18 out of 59 boards voted in favor. But some of the boards, and again, particularly in Manhattan, and we've talked about this before, they voted against it, but they voted for the provisions that were affecting other neighborhoods and other parts of the city. They're like, oh, we don't care about that. Whereas in Queens and in Brooklyn and the Bronx and Staten Island, all the boards that voted no, they voted no. And they said, we don't want to speak for these other neighborhoods. We would never want to put anything on Manhattan or Brooklyn or the, Staten Island or whatever. We know it's bad for us, and we don't want this to happen to anybody. So I think that that's also it's a segmentation or a sort of putting up the walls around your own little enclave, and that to me is dangerous, in my opinion, because we all have a commonality, right? And if we don't work together, that's the way that the people who wanted this thing to be rammed through, that's how they won.
Exactly.
Because we didn't all stand together.
Divide and conquer.
Divide and conquer. Yeah.
Always. We're so distracted, so divided in so many ways. Yeah, absolutely. Let me bring Rob in. Rob, any questions, any thoughts?
I don't have any particular thoughts. I just maybe on the last part of what is coming up. I think if you know anything about organizing in New York City, we've been a fractured left, a fractured society that organizes in silos. So none of what I'm hearing surprises me that, people vote one way or won't, vote against another neighborhood. That's traditional. Folks around development and housing never collaborate in this city. That's my thought after doing this work for 15 years.
Well, again, I think that's why I've been very happy that we have had so many groups who are working together on this, across the city and across every ethnic line and across economic lines and different densities. We have single family neighborhoods working with 13-story co-ops, working with NYCHA housing, working with, places all over the city. And I think that that's really important. And maybe that's what sets us apart, which is good. But as I said, I don't have the bandwidth to argue with people who want to save their neighborhood but don't really care about what happens to other people.
Absolutely, yeah.
I just don't. I don't have the time. My time is way too. I have time to sit with you guys. I don't have time to argue with people who are doing that.
Right.
Well, welcome to our selfish society. That's what we are.
Let's go. Let's go to Alex and then Luana and then Alex, you had your hand up.
Oh yeah, thank you so in terms of who's on the lawsuit, is there a greater need for individuals since they're the ones who can assert standing?
Well, no, individuals
I could
and
address
organizations can assert, but go ahead, Jack.
Yeah, it's a very good question. Organizations have standing, but their standing is demonstrated by individual members who are adversely affected by the zoning. So what I like to do is have a good mix of organizations, which shows the broad-based support we have, and also individuals who can tell their story about how this would affect them on a personal level. So we kind of combine both.
And that's something you can help someone with. Okay, how's this going to affect you? I mean, some people who are living in small tenement building probably saying, with the landlords trying to push them out of the building, they're probably thinking, okay, I'm good, but maybe they just don't know why they're
good. And that's why we have a great group of experts who can bring this to light to show how people who are already living in affordable housing, rent stabilized housing, could be forced out by this speculative real estate development, these bonuses that City of Yes gives to free market housing at the expense of rent and regulated housing.
I imagine it would facilitate it even faster. It's enough as it is. I mean, I'm constantly hearing from people, and landlords got this playbook about leaving their buildings kept and untaken care of, and boilers
Leaving
breaking
units
down.
empty, leaving
And
units empty.
yes,
Right.
all the time
Yes,
this
they're
happens. So
warehousing units, yes.
so you can show where it would be expedited by the city of Yes?
Yes, it's an interesting point because if you go through the City Planning Commission report, they keep saying that this rezoning will facilitate more housing. And then it's kind of a sleight of hand where the crisis is affordable housing. The crisis is not more housing, because we've had, through the last 2 decades, an explosion of luxury housing, but we have not had affordable housing. So what they've done is they've sold this package as promoting housing without addressing affordable housing. So it was a very clever public relations. And again, Paul always uses the word fraud, but that's
How
probably
about misdirection?
misdirection. No, I think fraud is, the more I get into it, Paul, the more I think fraud is the appropriate.
Yeah, call it what it is.
Try to be nice.
Definitely call it what it is. The lack of oversight that's been, I mean, you've got, like we were just saying, warehousing, the rent regulations, the filing of the right rent rules about having people in apartments and not registering them, I mean, there's so many Airbnbs, that sort of thing. I mean, there's so many reasons keeping apartments off. Well, for instance, NYCHA, I think Renee can correct me if I'm wrong, and I think we talked about this just recently too. There's about 5,000 empty apartments over there.
I think over 6,000.
6,000.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's never addressed. And how are you going to, if you're and I said to them before, so you're talking about crushing Elliott, Chelsea, and Fulton House, but you're going to talk about bringing affordable. I said, how does these two things weigh into the conversation? It's like it doesn't. And so their objectives are clear. And Luana, you had
Yes,
Yeah, no,
thank
I
you,
think
John. Alex had asked part of the question that I had. So I apologize if I had missed it because there's so many different issues going on in this city. But besides this platform, what other ways have you advertised or reached out in order to get more plaintiffs onto the lawsuit?
Well, I can say that it's not, we're not doing like a curtain call for
Right.
for targeting, right? We want to make sure that the people that are going to be plaintiffs are people who know the score, right? They're people who know what's going on, who can, again, no one's going to be called up on the stand here, right? It's just putting it into the papers saying, my name is Paul Graziano and or Luana Green, and I live here, and I'm the president of this association or not, and where I live, this is how it's going to adversely affect me. So we're being targeted and judicious about how we're reaching out to people to do that.
Alex, is that something you feel like that Charlie and both your organizations and maybe Right to Counsel we can get on board with and bring them?
Well, I'll say that they were late to the dance as far as City of Yes. Like I was the one that was like writing stuff. But anyway, not to, put the spotlight on me, but the short answer I think would be no, because they're just like obsessed with the whole canvassing thing, aligned in lockstep basically with housing justice for all. So no, I don't think so.
You don't think
a lot of the
Charlie-
housing groups, as we know, got co-opted by this, right? They were fed a bill of goods, and they don't, their attitude was, better this than nothing. And the answer is actually better nothing than this.
Well, I think it's important to understand, and I've spent a few weeks going through this, Alex, with a fine-tooth comb, is there's nothing in this rezoning that incentivizes or mandates affordable
No
housing.
mandates at all, none.
I
Yeah,
know.
there are no, but I think the city was very clever in how they put this forward in advertising or promoting this as something that would encourage more affordable housing. But it does the opposite because it encourages market rate and because it incentivizes market rate housing, particularly in some of the lower density communities, which I
Yeah.
grew up in, as I said, Southeast Queens. This will reduce affordable housing. This will promote the disparity between the wealthy, middle class, and poor that's been going on for the last few decades. So it to me, it's tragic that if people believe or were misled to believe that this giveaway to profiteering by obliterating zoning rules will promote affordable housing. Uh, that's kind of a sad conclusion.
There's
Yeah.
sorry, John, just real quick.
Go ahead.
I do want to mention a side effect of this that is starting to happen as well. Every property, now think about it, every property has essentially been upzoned automatically across the city. What happens when the speculative value of a property goes up? Your taxes go up because your tax rates are based upon not only the square footage of your house and your property, but the value, the quote unquote book value, right? There, the assessment. So, for example, where I live on a piece of property with a house, a 1900 square foot house. So it's the tax rate is based partially on that. But now, because the development potential on my property has significantly increased, the tax implications have increased as well. So I just want to throw that out there that nobody has even brought this up, but this is literally a secret hidden tax increase on every property in the city of New York that I'm positive the people inside the Adams administration knew exactly what they were doing here. And when people see this, and remember, there's a specific formula that people have to pay every year. It can only go up 8% over 5 years and 20% assessments, et cetera. But what they do is they're able to mess with these formulas so that even when the property values essentially go down, your tax rates still go up, right? So this has all created an increase in that as well. And that's going to put a lot of people who are already borderline struggling to maintain their units, their co-ops, or their 1 or 2 family homes, or whatever it is. It might drive some of those people out just for that alone.
I'm so glad you mentioned that because that has been a tool even prior to this to eliminate the small or crunch the small building owners, the small
Correct.
apartment building owners.
Yep.
You're a one person, one building owner. I mean, you're opened up to being gobbled up by a larger developer or a larger renter or real estate holder, and that's what it does. And just like we as people being washed out of the system, they're washing the single owner out of the system as well. And I heard these complaints from folks, even on a building owner side. So yeah, that is really important, and that should have been kind of upfront as well. And I think when we're in these rallies and the people are worried, you can see the worry. They're doing the Airbnbs. Sometimes some of them are legitimately struggling, and that's a very important point there. And that's maybe another group of people we can rally to come, bring into the fold. And with that, I do want to get into the validity. I mean, the strengths about the lawsuit, but Renee has her hand up. Let me go to Renee and maybe see if there's any new people that might want to be shy about asking questions. Go ahead, Renee.
No, I think the real problem is that Rob said that we're all in silos, but at the same time, this constant coming to consensus and with conditions has made everything worse. It puts targets on people's back. Sometimes the word has to be no to these developers.
Correct.
Let's not constantly try to say, we got to figure out how it's done. Say no. That's what community boards need to do. And unfortunately, in Manhattan, they screwed up. I was hoping that the outer boroughs, they have the sense. They know what's really going on. They understand what's on the line. Manhattanites, unfortunately, do not. And that has been the real problem. This with conditions has basically going to take down this city. And unless they understand that and are willing to stand and start fighting instead of constantly capitulating, we're in deep trouble.
And by the way, in the environmental review portion, they don't care whether it's a yes with conditions or a yes, or a no with conditions or no. It's a yes or a no. So I agree with you 100% that the conditions are worthless, and it's a way for them to delude themselves that they're actually going to be listened to.
Yeah, we pressured the community board, particularly 4 and 5. I said, why conditions? Say no. I said, even there was a lot of fractured groups within the community board about that. Why are you going to negotiate? Why do you think you can negotiate? It was absurd. Luana and I had so many conversations over this.
Yeah, you're negotiating with yourselves.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, one of the problems I think there is that there, besides the silos, which I really hate that everybody is we have one common goal in many areas, right? And yet we don't gather together. There's strength in numbers, right? But one of the things that bothers me is that I think when we have these issues like the City of Yes, our politicians and other organizations or other properties, management companies, co-ops, whatever, are so connected to these elected officials that they're afraid to step out of line for fear that they won't get the benefits that they may need to run their properties or whatever. And I think there's a conflict because our elected officials have shown that they are more leaning towards the developers rather than the residents of the city or their constituents for that matter. So I think, there's a fear in that, oh, we won't get what we need if we go against this policy, and therefore we're stuck, right? So I'm having this issue because I would love to sign on, but because I'm on a board, a specific board, I don't know that even if it's something that I can even do because there's so much connectivity with the outside entities. So I'll
Shall
let you
we?
know. But yeah, I think it's collusion, and it's really a sad situation. Like it's quid pro quo, right? So.
But you can bring them to your board meetings, though.
Well,
I
I'm
mean,
gonna bring up the issue myself because it's something that we need to deal with because everybody is going to be affected by this situation. I mean, if you look at what happened, 57th Street or whatever, where they bought all the air rights and for all these blocks, and then they built this one tall cigarette building, right? So they were doing this long before we even got to City of Yes,
Oh,
right?
absolutely. Under the previous,
So
absolutely.
now they just want to make it legal to do it all over.
Jack,
Right.
what's the
That's a
deadline?
very good point.
What's our deadline for plaintiffs? Like, what's a reasonable deadline for us to know that?
Let me just address Ms. Green's point first. You touched upon a key provision of City of Yes, because what they did previously when they had to do these monstrosities, as you point out on 57th Street, they had to go through a land use discretionary process. They had to get a special permit or variance, and they had to go through an environmental review. So why they call this City of Yes? Because in the future now, they could do these projects. All they have to do is apply for a permit, and the community is completely frozen out of any kind of input or say. So it was abusive in the past, as you point out. But now it's going to be a matter of rote, a matter of
it's pro forma
normalcy,
right?
And that's really I think you really hit the crux of this rezoning. That's why they call it City of Yes, because in the past they had to include the community. Now it's just a yes to speculation, development, and profiteering.
Yep.
So thank you. Thank you for that.
So Jack, what are we looking at in terms of like a deadline for people who want to be plaintiffs?
Well, let me just say, when you file a lawsuit, the nature that we're filing, there's a 4-month statute of limitations. So notwithstanding that this is a process that's been going on for 2 years and covers thousands of pages of documentation and hundreds of rules and regulations, we have to file this within 4 months. So my understanding, and Paul, you may differ on this, but my understanding is the city council passed the resolution on December 5th. Is that not correct?
And then it was signed by the mayor on December 18th.
December
18th.
18th. So the 4 months runs out April 18th.
Or April 17th.
17th.
April 17th. Yeah.
But because we want to give some room to, in case there's a problem with the filing or service, we like to give ourselves a 2 or 3 week cushion because you never know what could go wrong. And, we don't want to lose out because we missed the deadline. So we kind of put a self-imposed deadline toward the end of March, which would give us a couple of week cushion. Now, Larry and I have been working on this along with our experts, and I think we'll be ready to file by the self-imposed deadline, which now I think is toward the end of March. So to get the plaintiffs on board, which would require an integration of everyone's personal experiences and impacts into the lawsuit, I'd like to get that within the next 10 days. Does that sound fair, Paul?
Yeah. And I have a list of, 60 or 70 so far, what I'm going to be able to do is essentially write up briefs for them or these are not hard to do.
We call them biographies.
Yeah, and they're very short. I mean, they're not anything huge, but again, if someone is interested in doing this within this group, we just need to know so that we can get a
and I think we would like a diverse group because we want to show the court that this is not, they've been classifying us and people who oppose development as what, quote, NIMBY. We want to show that we have a diverse, coalition of all sectors of the city that are calling this to light and showing the issues. And I don't want to stand up in court and be accused of, this is a situation where people are trying to stall progress. So, the bigger the coalition, the more diverse, the better off, we'll be in terms of how we project this to the court.
Yeah, you can count us in. I'll definitely run it by everybody, but I don't see any problems. Luana, do you? And then I'll send this video out to the folks I was hoping to be here today. City Club, Rethink, all those folks, and Save Chelsea. I'm hoping to get them involved.
So is Midtown South are you a filed organization with the state? Okay.
501c3, yeah.
Or 501c3. Okay, great.
I have a question for Jack and Paul and Larry. So if an organization doesn't want to join the Article 78 as a plaintiff, can they do an amicus brief, or is that not allowed in Article 78?
That's another good question. So an amicus brief is something that's commonly done in lawsuits of this nature. And you would have to prove to the court that you have an interest in the controversy and that as an organization, you can add to the court's perspective and information about the case. So amicus is certainly appropriate. And if some organization did not join as a plaintiff, amicus briefs are appreciated and they are helpful. And often courts cite amicus briefs in their decision. So it's a very helpful tool. But of course, primarily, we would like people to join with us as a grassroots coalition effort. But amicus is certainly helpful.
That's a good. I'm glad you said that, because what we'll do is we'll, during our ask, we'll add that in, and you know, as an option for folks.
And
Not the first option.
ideally, if there's interest in doing amicus briefs, one or more, it would be very helpful if we could coordinate that with you and with the attorneys who would be working on the amicus brief to make sure we're you know, on the same wavelength.
Okay. All right, that would be good. And you've been very talkative, Lawrence. Anything to add?
You know, there's one thing in listening to this whole discussion, which is very interesting and helpful to me, because I'm going to be working on the legal papers, you know, as we all are. But what is it about City of Yes? Because I think Paul, you were very eloquent in discussing the really negative impact that this would have on neighborhoods where, you know, like the neighborhood you live in, with a lot of one family, maybe two family housing. And we talked about 57th Street and the monstrous towers that have gone up without input of the community. What in particular would you say, what's particularly bad about City of Yes for housing opportunity for this part of the city that the MSCC represents?
Well, I mean, as I said, every piece of the City of Yes affects every property in the city of New York, right? So what it's done is, remember, what is it called? City of Yes for housing opportunity, right? So again, I think let's forget about the word housing and emphasize opportunity. So what has this done? This will now increase the encouragement of developers to redevelop properties, right? Because really what all of this is about, right, is the enhancement of the ability of developers to redevelop properties. And I think, you know, we kind of touched on it before, but there is a lot of pressure, particularly in places with rent stabilized apartments and other parts of Midtown and other parts of Manhattan, where if a developer has the ability to force these people out because now his 12-unit apartment building he can tear down, and now as of right, instead of building a 20-unit building where maybe 20 units wasn't worth it for him to tear down a 12-unit building, now he can build a 40-unit building. Now the numbers work, right? He gets his profit, not to mention getting rid of those pesky rent stabilized people and putting in market rate housing, right? This is what this enables everywhere. It's different scales, right? So obviously for me, replacing a one family home with a four-story apartment building with 20 units is catastrophic. Replacing a 14-unit building of rent stabilized units with a 40-unit building that maybe it's only 2 stories taller, but you've removed all of those rent stabilized units and replaced them with market rate housing. That has a massive effect, just that one building on that block, right? And it becomes a dominant effect.
Yeah, so ideally then, we talked about plaintiffs joining onto the lawsuit. Plaintiffs who are rent stabilized tenants would therefore be particularly helpful.
Yeah, I think to put a fine point on what Paul said, because I do a lot of rent stabilized tenant advocacy. What this will do is encourage demolition, and demolition
Redevelopment.
Right, and
Yeah.
demolition though is one of the ways that landlords can get out from under rent stabilization. So as Ms. Green pointed out, because you've removed the discretionary approval process, you've removed community input, you've now made this as of right just by rubber stamping permits. you're going to have whole classes of tenants being removed without any regulatory protections. So I think that's one of the issues we'll be focusing on, and it'd be helpful to have tenants in that community.
Yeah.
And plaintiffs in that community on our lawsuit.
Yeah, we shed a lot of rent control and rent stabilized every year, and then this just hasten it.
Yes.
I've seen it here on this block where a hotel developer came in, and I tried to talk him into doing housing, and basically he was sold the building, and it was stalled. He couldn't develop for years because he had bought it and it was rent stabilized and it was illegally um, destabilized, or it was sold to him, and he thought he'd do whatever he wants. And the community board had a hold on the property. They wouldn't allow him to develop until they came to some sort of terms together about allowing some, like affordable housing. And it, unfortunately, it was lost. A lot of those housing apartment buildings were lost, but it did gain something, and unfortunately I see it all the time. But anyway, we're running way over. um, Sue, are you still on? Did want to get her opinion on Surana. I thought she might have an interesting perspective. Does anybody have any other burning questions?
There was at the city of Yes hearing, there was a Staten Island elected. I forgot her name. She was very adamant against she was very Camilla. Okay.
Camilla Hanks.
Did they sign on to your
Well,
lawsuit?
Camilla won't be a plaintiff, but other electeds are. We already have a number of council members, as well as some state representatives and even congressional representatives who are all going to be signing on to the lawsuit. Yes.
That's funny because she was so against this plan.
Well,
She
just a
was
little
very
inside,
vocal.
a little inside baseball. She wasn't against it until I managed to get to her and show her exactly what was going to happen. So she was a late convert, but a good convert. I'm very happy that she understood finally what was going to happen, because like so many other council members, this is an extremely complicated situation. That this proposal was purposefully convoluted and complicated. And again, the council members are not experts in land use, with the exception of a few of them. And she was listening to the propaganda. So once I was able to show her everything, as I said, she was a late convert, and her line in the sand was accessory dwelling units. She was totally opposed to accessory dwelling units, and they promised her upside down and backwards, oh, we're not going to do them, and they never got rid of them. So she said, well, that was my line in the sand. So just on that alone, I'm out, right? And so other people, unfortunately, said they were opposed, and then they were bought off. Manhattan was different.
I'm not surprised.
There were only two council members in Manhattan who were opposed. Christopher Marte, who stayed opposed, he voted no, and Diana Ayala, who turned her vote because she got what she wanted.
Right. Like I was saying earlier, most of the electeds are invested with the developers.
It's all about the money.
The developers are invested in the electeds.
It's all about the money. That's all
Chris Banks, have you talked to Chris Banks?
Chris voted no.
Okay.
Not only did I talk to Chris, I talked to him directly. Yes. Yeah, Chris voted no. Farrah Lewis voted no. Mercedes voted no. Half of Queens voted no. Half of Brooklyn voted no. All of Staten Island voted no. And two people in the Bronx voted no. And one person in Manhattan voted no. So Queens, Staten Island, and Brooklyn were pretty solid. And the Bronx ones were ones who understood what was going on. And unfortunately, we had at least two other votes in the Bronx. We had multiple votes in Queens. We had multiple votes in Brooklyn, and they all got turned by Adrienne Adams at the last minute, who, again, her goal was to say, oh, we fixed this. Now it's okay. We saved the city, which is just ridiculous.
Right.
And those people, As I said, one person wanted $1 billion for, or not $1 billion, $1 million for this project. Someone else said, if you vote for me for this, I'll vote for the city of yes. It was all transactional, you know.
Yeah.
So
I found Chris to be, he was running a hearing for the Oversight Committee on NYCHA, and he really impressed me.
he knows what he's doing.
He
He's
does.
excellent. He's been a plaintiff. I should have, he was a lead plaintiff on a case we had challenging the NoHo Soho rezoning, which was successful.
Feel
And
free to reach out, Jack.
Gonna
Yeah.
say, may try him again after last
Yeah,
week's
feel free to
hearing, he
reach
may
out.
be
It'd be
more
great to have him as a
amenable.
plaintiff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me ask you one more question, and I know we're still we're going further over, but the I've often thought, you know, if we're going up against such powerful entities, you know, the developers and so forth, we need to come in there with a lot of different angles to the lawsuit. Okay, so that's my perspective. Okay, how many pieces of this pie are we attacking? How many of these how many pieces that are really very weak and very damaging to our society? Are you, I'm sure you're doing multiple. I haven't seen the papers, of course. I'm sure you can release, you know, as you get them ready, you can give us that information. But can you give us a general idea of all, you know, your multi-facet attack?
Yeah. And I had hoped I had done that in the opening outline.
Yeah.
But basically, to give you perspective, this is the first citywide rezoning that has had to adhere to the State Environmental Quality Review Act and the City Environmental Quality Review regulations. Because the last time the city rezoned was 1961. The environmental laws were passed in 1975 and have been updated through the decades. So what the city did in a very broad, and of course, I don't want to reveal too much because, you know, we don't want, you know, the city listens and I don't want to give them any ideas. But I could tell you from a broad perspective, what the city did was perform what's known as a generic environmental impact statement.
Okay.
What that means is because they characterized it as generic, they did not do any environmental review of any specific impacts of any particularized zoning change. So as Paul points out, they picked out 28 prototypical sites,
Right.
and they evaluated those sites, even though, again, as Paul has done extensive work on this over 18 months, there are over 300,000 sites. So by picking out 28 prototypical sites, because they characterize it as generic,
And let's call it cherry picking.
cherry picking, they
Yeah.
failed to do, and this is a fundamental principle of the State Environmental Quality Review Act, is that you have to give a hard look to all significant environmental consequences of your action. So as I showed in the outline, they came to the conclusion on major areas such as neighborhood character, socioeconomic conditions, open space, historical resource. They came to the conclusion that because they picked out 28 prototypical sites, there would be no significant environmental impacts. That means they failed to give a hard look to a whole host of environmental consequences, particularly infrastructure, displacement, loss of affordable housing, influencing neighborhood character in terms of impacts on health resources, open space, parks. I mean, the list is quite extensive. So that's one area of attack. The second area is they did come to the conclusion that even though they only did 28 prototypical sites, that there would be significant environmental impacts in certain discrete areas. For example, impact
School.
on early childhood education, public schools. And what they then turned around and said was, well, we're not going to do any kind of mitigation. Now, get this. One of the principles of the State Environmental Quality Review Act, reason it was passed, is because when you do an action subject to environmental review, there has to be mitigation, right? You have to kind of decrease the negative environmental consequences. So what the city said is we're not going to do mitigation. Why? Because we don't know where these sites are going to be developed in the future. And therefore, we don't have to do mitigation, because how could we predict where development is going to occur? Now, that's okay. That's what a generic environmental review allows. But what they didn't take into consideration, and I think this is a key part of the lawsuit, is the cumulative impacts of the first two stages combined with the third. So you had carbon neutrality, economic development, and housing opportunity. You take all three together and it triggers, and this is why I was appreciative of what Ms. Green said, is that in the future, these developments will be as of right. So they piggyback on the three priors, which no cumulative impacts were assessed. And in the future, when they develop these sites, which will have negative environmental consequences, which they acknowledge, they will not review that,
Right.
because it's as of right. So that's the so the lawsuit is based on, and again, I don't want to get into too many details,
Right.
because we're in the public domain and the city. I don't want to tip off the city, but the two major issues is the segmentation, because they did three pieces which should have been reviewed as a whole, and they did it piecemeal to avoid significant environmental consequences. And the fact that they did a generic review, irrationally picking out 28 prototypical sites when there are over 300,000 sites. So those are two major. There are some other issues we're raising, which we kind of want to hold our fire on until we file. But from a macro perspective, because this is the first rezoning that's ever gone through an environmental review, the city came up with a way to avoid having to comply with the statute, which they never had to do before when they did major rezoning. So
Right,
I
because
think
this is not a discrete area like a ULURP rezoning.
right.
Right.
So
Just two comments, Jack, on what you just said. One, now those seem to us at this somewhat early stage is very good points that we'll raise in our papers. But until you sit down, you finish your research and you sit down and you actually start writing it out, your view of the case could change dramatically. So, that's really kind of up in the air at this point to say definitively what issues we're going to be raising. Just one other thing you alluded to, not to be overly paranoid, but this 2-hour discussion we've just had is being recorded.
Well, let me just say 2 points you raised. Litigation is always fluid, John. As you know, we file papers, they file answering papers, we file reply papers. In terms of what I put into the public domain, I've been doing this almost 4 decades. So I'm accustomed to communicating with public groups before I file lawsuits. And, I have a good sense of what should be out there in the public domain and, what the city will hear about. A lot of what I'm saying was raised in the public commentary during the DEIS process, during the scoping process, at public meetings. So it's not new to the city, but there are some very fine points in terms of case precedent, in terms of statutory violations that will come out in the papers that we will distribute once we file. The New York State Environmental Quality Review Act is very detailed.
Yeah.
So, for example, on the section on scoping, there are at least 24 rules and regulations that the city must follow in terms of doing the scoping. And when I was in the library this past weekend, I picked out half a dozen already that were obliterated. And the case law is very clear that secret is a procedural statute and a substantive, so that every procedure must be followed. And there's a lot of case law that supports us that if the city tries to, or the state tries to circumvent particularized procedural elements of the statute, that the court would nullify that. So why this is a strong case is because what the city did was unprecedented.
Yeah.
In terms of how they approach the environmental review process in the citywide rezoning. So there'll be a lot of issues, what we call first impression, which the courts have never looked at previously. And so, you don't like to predict results, but we feel very optimistic.
Cool. Okay, so I'm going to ask you a question offline, but as for concluding this meeting, I think we should conclude it because we spent a lot of time here, valuable time, wonderful time. It's good to get to know you. Just for the rest, we're signing off, and want to thank you for being here and sticking with us for such a long time too. Usually it's a 2-hour meeting. We're going into 3 hours now, which is, I mean, sometimes you just got to dig in and talk about these issues, and I'm glad the other speaker didn't show, so because it allowed more time. And so anyway, with that, thanks for everyone for being here. I'm going to pause this now, the recording, and then I'm going to stop recording and
Thank you.
Stop.
John,